Biotech continuing to slide lower. The XBI biotech ETF falling more than 3% today. And for the year, it is now down close to 40%. Our next guest says the sector is saturated with unbuyable assets and a self-correction is in store. But he adds there are still a few bright spots. Let's bring in Oppenheimer healthcare equity strategist Jared Holz. Jared, good to see you.
You too.
So
Thanks for having me.
Self-correction sounds pretty rough. What do you mean by that? That the stock price has to continue to go lower, or that some of these names will just be taken out in one way, shape, or form?
Yeah, for sure. It's less about stock prices or consolidation by means of sort of traditional M&A. But I pulled up a sheet last week of 820 of these biotech companies, all the way from J&J to companies that have an enterprise value of in the negative billions, and there are 500 or more companies with an enterprise value of $100 million or less. That's close to 60% of this entire category. You could almost just define as either non-investable or non-viable, depending on where these programs are. And so many of them have started and then been halted or stopped, or the data's been presented and it hasn't been viewed positively by investors. We almost have to kind of go through this self-cleansing process in order for biotech to kind of redefine itself. And by that, I kind of mean we almost have to focus up cap, and there isn't that much left up there.
So when you did this screen, Jared, I'm presuming that a lot of that 60% of that cohort also does not make a profit. In other words, they don't have a product on the market, or maybe they do and they don't make a profit on that product yet. And so it sounds like there's going to be a reckoning. Some of these names won't have access to capital markets anymore, and they will no longer cease to operate. They will cease to operate, excuse me.
Yeah, we've totally already seen some of that reckoning. I mean, the XBI is a proxy for biotech, down 60% since last year. It seems to really not catch, a continuous or, anywhere near a real bid in the market, despite, what the S&P is doing on any particular day. So I think a lot of that has been absorbed. But yes, I think we're at the point where some of the companies have to sort of face the facts, and they have to move on from either the program that they were starting with or move on from being a company at all. And I know so much has been talked about in terms of how much cash some of these companies are, maybe giving some of that back to shareholders, having some of these assets merge with one another in order to create less entities would be some sort of solution. But we're definitely not there yet.
Tim's got a pairs trade, and so I wanted to, Tim, can you run it by Jared? I'm curious.
Well, Jared, and you listed a couple of names that you like. Vertex is one of the first names you put on there. The $68 billion company has a free cash flow yield of 4 or 5%, which isn't crazy, but it's relative to peers. And if I did a pairs trade of the IBB versus the XBI, and I was long the IBB, I'm up 30% since November. My sense is, from your thesis, that trade continues to work.
I think it could. Yeah, we discussed this back in the fall. I remember it pretty well. In terms of the fact that large caps had started to sort of move higher. The biotech index had moved very consistently from the highs to the low, and it ended the year close to the lows, and it's been worse from then on. I think that's probably okay over the short term. There's a defensive bid in the market. I think that helps the IBB a little bit. And even a day like today, we saw some of these larger cap biotech stocks outperform. Many of them were actually up on the day when the XBI was down a couple bucks again. So I think that probably, over the next few months, I wouldn't be surprised if that continued to happen.
Jared, it's Karen. Thanks for being on. If one were interested in the IBB, I would think that you would need to think there'll be some consolidation, right? That a big cap needs to come in, or bigger cap, let's say, needs to come in and buy. Are there ones that you think are most likely to be taken out?
It's so tough, Karen, to sort of pinpoint, the next company to get taken out, or the next companies. What I would say is, when we look at, the cross section of large cap pharma companies, I think like the predominant factor that I believe determines whether investors are interested in owning the stock of a Pfizer or a J&J or a Merck, et cetera, is revenue growth, and consistent revenue growth over a 5 to 10 year period. And kind of when we look at it that way, that would basically mean there would be, 15 to 30 companies, call it, that would be acquirable, that would be material for revenue growth. So when I look at it that way, if that's correct, it would be, as Tim mentioned earlier, like a Vertex, even though it is certainly not inexpensive and it's larger. But Vertex, Neurocrine, Insight, Horizon, Seagen, I think these all kind of make sense. Valuation is probably the chief pushback. We can go back and forth on, each drug and how good they are, et cetera. But I think when you look from a framework of what is large cap pharma looking for, or what would actually make a difference, it would be some of these larger cap biotech names.
Jared, good to see you. Thank you.
Anytime. Thank you.
Jared Holz, Oppenheimer. So Steve Gross, we should make clear that IBB versus XBI, it's a planned market cap, right? So XBI weights smaller market caps, and IBB are the large biotech companies.
Yeah, and if you go, it's almost 2-to-1. It's not quite there yet. But if you look at if the IBB is turning and these large cap names are going to garner a lot of investor attention, the first thing that investors do is look towards the beta. What's the outsized play? And that's the XBI. You want to look for these names because they're going to have outsized performance on the way up, but you want to look for cash-rich balance sheet companies on the smaller cap names.
Would you put that pair straight on?
I'll tell you what, if you look at that trade also and you removed Moderna from the IBB, so I'm taking it back from November. Moderna was a $350 stock. It's now $45 stock right now. That trade does even better. Yeah, I like that trade still. Not because of the past history, because of where I think it can go in the future.